Corpse Party is a horror adventure game for the PSP. Now, when I requested this game for review, this was a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I ended up immediately being drawn into the game's story and its strong emphasis on horror and atmosphere. The game opens up with the characters performing a magical charm to make sure that they all stay friends, because one of the characters is moving away and it was her last day to spend with her friends. It's at this point that there's an earthquake and the 9 characters get separated, and when they wake they find themselves in an interdimensional, ghost-filled, haunted school. Now, the location that this game takes place in is a school where a couple of children were murdered back in the 70s. As you play through the game, you will solve some puzzles, put some spirits to rest, and hopefully along the way you will be just a little bit scared by some of the spooky stuff that happens in this game. Now, despite its simplistic graphical style, there are some genuinely spooky moments. Adding to the horror, the strongest element of this game is its sound design. Now, the voice acting is still in Japanese, but I found myself listening to the voice work, because when the characters reacted to something scary, when something happened, you could hear the terror in their voices. There's really good voice work, and the sound design, the sounds of the school, are all very well done. This is one of the best sounding games I've played. It just really stood out and struck me, the atmosphere that was built by the outstanding audio. There were a couple of things that turned me off early in the game. Once I got out of chapter 1, it was no longer a problem. There was one puzzle where you read on the ground, under no circumstances read the newspaper. So I walked over to the newspaper, and then it locked the door and I couldn't get out. I had recently saved, so I just restarted the game and skipped that room. Once I got to the end of the chapter, I couldn't beat it no matter what I did, and I was getting a little frustrated. So I looked up what I did wrong, and it turns out you have to read the newspaper and get locked in the room. After triggering a cutscene and then waiting for about 30 seconds to a minute, the door just unlocks. Now, I didn't give it enough time to do that because I had recently saved, so that's kind of my fault, but at the same time, there's a dead body next to a message that said, under no circumstances read the newspaper, and then after reading the newspaper, I got locked in. Keep that in mind. You have to do that to beat chapter 1. That's the only spoiler I'm going to give away. But that was kind of frustrating that I had to get locked in. This is definitely a mature game. There's a couple of things that you're going to see that are definitely intended for mature audiences. I would say anyone, honestly, 12 and up would be okay for this game. There's some mature elements. A lot of the ghosts were murdered in pretty grisly fashion. They were elementary school-aged children that had their tongues cut out and parts of their head cut off. Very graphic violence. Now, granted, it's presented in a 16-bit styled artwork, but from time to time, there are full-screen, well-drawn images of, you know, the murder victims and the ghosts and stuff like that. So keep that in mind if you're easily frightened, or if you're thinking of purchasing this for a child. I would say about 12 and up is where I would put it. The only other thing that I have to complain about is the bright, flashing white and red screens. To emphasize that something horrible and spooky is happening, the screen will flash red, or it will flash white. Now, if you're prone to epileptic seizures, you may want to take that into consideration, because this happens a lot. It doesn't happen like very rapidly, but there was an instance or two where it did kind of happen, you know, flash, flash, flash. So if you're easily affected by something like that, keep that in mind. Overall, I had a great time playing through this game, and it was nice to see the characters bond and pull together, or to see them being affected by their horrible situation, or being possessed, being torn apart by these evil forces at play, or how some characters did lean on each other and manage to get through it. Now, there's not a lot of gameplay, but there is a lot of story, so if you want to see these characters go through something that's legitimately scary, and see them pull together, die, try to survive, make it through, this is a recommended game for people that enjoy adventure games, point-and-click games, and visual novels. If you're a fan of that genre of game, or you're a fan of horror, I strongly recommend it. But this game is definitely not for everyone, so keep that in mind. If you remember old adventure games and how some of the puzzles don't make sense, like under no circumstance don't read that newspaper, but you have to read the newspaper. If you can appreciate games like that, if you can appreciate old school adventure games and point-and-click games and visual novels, then yes, by all means, check this game out. If you're a big fan of horror and like spooky stuff, go ahead and check this game out. But if you're expecting an action-packed game, there's not a lot of gameplay. Generally, towards the later part of the game is where you're going to do most of the puzzle solving. So keep that in mind. I enjoyed the game. I think if you like those genres, you will enjoy this game.